¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes. ¿Cómo están? Bienvenidos una vez más a UCHAM Panamá. Desde el Comité de Desarrollo Organizacional nos sentimos muy contentos de tener el desarrollo de un nuevo comité. Ya prácticamente han pasado unos 4 meses desde que iniciamos por el desarrollo de las actividades y han sido una montaña rusa sumamente interesante de aprendizaje. Y gracias a cada uno de ustedes, también los que nos acompañan en línea, por acompañarnos en todo este proceso. Hoy tenemos una visita muy especial de Hungría y nos sentimos muy emocionados de recibir acá en Panamá y sobre todo en las oficinas de AmCham al señor Zsolt Feher, Vice President de HOGAN Assessment, y de igual forma de Stefan, quien nos acompaña desde Millennial Assessment para conversar con nosotros sobre un tema súper latente dentro de nuestras culturas organizacionales y es cómo también el liderazgo efectivo impacta el desarrollo de nuestras gestiones comerciales, la gestión de nuestro talento y cómo realmente nosotros podemos reconocer cómo esto está impactando el mundo y cómo no dejar atrás pues, el principal eslabón que al final es la gestión del talento. El talento lo que va muy de la mano con la productividad. A todos los que nos acompañan en línea, muchísimas gracias por conectarse. De igual forma que están acá presencialmente, gracias por dar espacio de su día para compartir con nosotros pues, esta interesante presentación. No quiero quitarles más tiempo sin antes pues, agradecerles tanto a Stefan por hacer esta conexión posible. De alguna u otra forma, pues conecta también esa activa participación que tiene AmCham en otros países y cómo lo corresponde. Zsolt es Vice President en HOGAN Assessment. Él tiene una alta experiencia en el desarrollo corporativo, con mucha experiencia en recursos humanos, y esto es algo que nosotros realmente queremos destacar. La presentación de esta tarde puede llevarse en el idioma inglés. Sin embargo, pues Stefan nos ayudará también a aterrizar algunos insights de algunos puntos clave también en español para que pues todos los participantes podamos hacer nuestras preguntas, consultas. De igual forma, como siempre, en los últimos 10 o 15 minutos de la sesión lo vamos a abrir para un espacio de activa colaboración con preguntas, respuestas, comentarios, porque eso es lo que nosotros realmente nos llevamos a esa colaboración y cómo nos llevamos esa experiencia nutrida. Quiero agradecerle especialmente a Stefan y también a Zsolt por darnos esta posibilidad de desarrollar este interesante tema. Y yo tengo acá una frase que escribí hoy y la quiero compartir con ustedes, la digo en inglés para que Zsolt también pueda confirmar esa línea. Y dice, leadership is not only about managing people, it's about creating culture, improving performance, building trust, and helping organizations achieve better results. Yo creo que esta debe ser esa base de que nosotros nos vayamos de acá de esta charla con ese engranaje de que todo lo comercial, todo lo técnico siempre va a ser importante, pero esos resultados convergen a través de las personas y creo que es lo que realmente vamos a desarrollar hoy. Así que no les quiero quitar más tiempo. Bienvenido Stefan, bienvenido Mr. Zsolt. Esta powerful audience is yours. Así que adelante, bienvenidos.
Gracias. We're gonna get the slides because I think we need to switch to this slide. So it's working as well. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for coming. Thank you very much, Mrs. Gracias. As I mentioned, Lebo aprendo español de dedo, but I mean, I'm not going to push it. I'm not going to push it for today, but I have dangerously enough knowledge of Spanish. If you want to ask questions, probably I'm going to be able to entertain, and not great colleague Stefan is going to be able to help me out in this matter. I also understood from most of the technical details have been shared with you in Spanish already. Also, there's going to be an interesante presentación. We'll see. Hopefully it's going to be interesting enough for you. We are coming with a little provocative statement here in the beginning, because if you notice, even in the announcement, the promotion of this program, we talked about under the effective leadership, and we kind of twisted a little bit, and we're talking about ineffective leadership because we believe many organizations, models, leadership associations, institutions are talking about the effective part. And we believe that there is another angle which we have to take into consideration. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. how we believe that ineffective leaders are actually way more dangerous for organizations, and how to learn, how to avoid those individuals or help individuals to learn, to develop themselves to a better angle, to become a better leader. We are at the Organizational Development Committee, so most of the dealing with people. I'm sure you hired people before, a lot of people. At some point of your career, you've been involved in the hiring process. And I have to use right now a Star Wars example. I hope you like Star Wars, the great journey of Luke Skywalker and all his ancestors and so on and so forth. When we are hiring people, we all looking for Anakin Skywalker, the great Jedi, who is going to be fantastic and looks very bright and young and smart and capable and physical, everything what you want. And suddenly this guy turns to be Darth Vader, which is screwing the whole story, basically. The whole thing, we wanted to have someone who's really a high potential individual, put him to her to a position, leadership position sooner or later, and we believe they're going to really perform well. And then they are at the tip of their career, something goes wrong. Why is that happening? Why is that happening to people all around the world? Oops, I need something else. This one was working for the. Here we go. Yes. So why is it happening to individuals who are very successful in their career, and at some point of time in their career, they're getting caught because they are just getting too much of themselves? They even maybe have some financial issues, which are not going in a wrong way. And I'm not talking about the current FIFA president, as you see. Guilty, innocent until proven guilty. So we'll see about that. But there are other people, like, for example, Martin Winterkorn, who was the CEO of Volkswagen, purposely bringing not only US examples here for today. So he was a German gentleman who was running Volkswagen Group as a very, very successful organization. He was very well known to opening new plants, putting up the new Golf model, everything was super, super successful. At some point, when they had the big diesel scandal, you might hear about it, you might remember, when they manipulated a little bit the engines, and it was like absolutely wrong record, which was showed to the people who wanted to see how much is the diesel, consumption of the specific engine. They constantly lied about it, and he never realized when is the point when they have to come through and have to really talk about this to individuals all around the world. And from the top of the world, being one of the most successful CEOs at all times of Volkswagen Group, he went down really to nothing. He lost his job. He lost everything. He actually went into house arrest because there was a lot of criminal charges still going against him. Not only in the corporate world, and not only with male leaders, but also with female leaders, similar things are happening. They're getting to the top of organizations, and with constantly making bad decisions, maybe not having full self-awareness about themselves, they're ruining companies such as Marissa Mayer around Yahoo, or Dick Fuld, who was called the gorilla of the Wall Street, the former president of Lehman Brothers, who not only ruined his own company, Lehman Brothers, but you all remember 2007, 2008, the worldwide crisis. Sometimes when you have people on the driver's seat, they might have influence not only on the company, on their own team, but even in the world economy, which was in the case of the gorilla right there at Lehman Brothers. It's not only happening at large organizations, it's happening at startups. Like we all know by now Elizabeth Holmes' story, who promised to the world that they're going to analyze, from one drop of blood, your complete blood. Analytics, everything comes out of it, and we knew it already that she was lying all through his way, such as Adam Newman with WeWork, doing a similar story. And not from too long, we also see Dave Calhoun's example at Boeing, when he's not the only one who blamed, to be fair, but when Boeing actually moved away from the original base of the organization, which was really a scientifically run engineering organization, turned to a money-making machine, they immediately went wrong, and he was also part of that story. Thanks God, Boeing is recovering right now, so that's a good one. But also not from too late. We have also Sam Bankman-Fried, who was running the FTX crypto company, which was, of course, also find very much of a fraudulent activity out there. Before I go further, I don't know, Stefan, if you would like to add anything from a local culture perspective, an example or something like that.
Justo, y parte de lo que queremos. Voy a estar interviniendo un poco yo para aterrizar algunos conceptos que a lo mejor en inglés se nos pueden pasar. Pero justo acá quiero que reflexionemos también en nuestro día a día, ¿no? Porque es muy fácil ver esos casos de éxito globales que llegan a momentos de descarrilación. Nos pasa en cualquier empresa, hasta en negocios familiares, ¿no? O sea, por ejemplo, viendo un poco la cultura acá en Panamá, pues vemos muchos negocios familiares que van a cierto ritmo, hereda un hijo o una hija, y después no necesariamente traemos el mismo estilo de liderazgo y empezamos a ver estos comportamientos similares a los que vemos en los grandes corporativos a nivel global, ¿no? Entonces, justo pensando hacia lo que va a empezar, vamos a ver en el resto de la presentación, es como que traer esas historias a la cabeza, ¿no? Porque no solo se trata de los grandes hijos, se trata de las personas que están liderando hoy en día, y van a ver que muchas estadísticas que sí se presentan a nivel global y que vamos a ver a continuación, tienen mucho impacto también en el día a día de los CEOs, directores generales, country managers que vemos acá, ¿no? Y que probablemente ustedes interactúan mucho con ellos. Entonces, siempre como que traer a la mente que no todo, y es parte de la tesis que vamos a presentar, no todo el liderazgo que hoy en día existe necesariamente es efectivo, ¿no? Entonces, ahora vamos a ver qué es esa otra cara de la moneda que muchas veces existe y que vale la pena tener en cuenta cuando hablamos de liderazgo.
Thank you, Stefan. I hope everyone on the camera as well and in the online way hearing us well. Feel free to obviously interrupt anytime when you have any questions, but also if anyone from online would like to have a question, please feel free to do so. So we believe that leadership is a problem, a big problem, if it's not in the right place. Leadership is the most important problem in human affairs. That's what we believe at HOGAN Assessments, the company which I represent, because we believe that when good leadership is in place, everything is good. Organizations, even countries, prosper, everyone wins. When bad leadership is in place, those organizations and countries are failing. So why is that happening? We know that we have to take into consideration a certain thing which was put up by Wilfred Pareto, who is a famous Italian economist who actually never lived in Italy. Actually, was living in Paris and Swiss, but this doesn't matter. Really, he invented this rule himself because when he was actually watching his own garden and he looked at the peas and he figured that 20% of the peas actually producing 80% of the real, vegetable inside. And he figured that in most organizations, there is the same thing. How are we getting to that? How are we getting those people on board to really on the top 20% who is really going to, contribute 80% to your organization? That's going to be really a question here, and that's why it's always important to take into consideration. We believe that leadership is defined in a way which is not necessarily the best these days. Because if you ask the question who gets to the top of large, hierarchic, bureaucratic, male-dominated organizations, usually smart, ambitious, politically astute players who may not be leaders. They are very great politicians within their own organization circle, but most of the cases they're really missing what actually means, what we mean about leadership. And actually 2/3 of those CEOs are going to fail within 1.5 years, 2 years of their tenure. That's a very terrifying, very, very terrifying statistics, but unfortunately it is true because we believe that the accepted definition of leadership is clearly wrong. Why is it wrong? Because I think when we're defining leadership, we're talking about actually the leader becoming resource for their own organization, the leader who is assembling the team and operating it long-term successfully. That's our definition of leadership. And if leadership is good, then the engagement is high. And unfortunately, that's not the case. We know Gallup every year basically reporting the same number. 65% of the global workforce is alienated. Even worse, that 75% of the workers say that the worst thing in their life is basically the immediate boss. And unfortunately, there are even more terrifying statistics. Like, for example, the same amount of people would say that they would rather take a pay cut if somebody would fire their boss. And there is an even more terrifying statistics, if you're ready to get that. It's a little bit a horror story, actually. We have looked into some studies which has been done in its east coast of US, but also this has been repeated in London, that in the construction industry, 10-15% of the construction workers actively fantasizing about killing their boss. So this is a very, very serious situation. And even just to go back to more realistic area, for sure, almost everyone here in the room or in the online broadcasting had in their life someone who was an intolerable boss who actually made your life kind of inconvenient. So we believe that the modern leadership tendency is not really going in a right way. As Matthew Stewart said in the Management Myth article in 2009, among colleagues and clients with whom I worked, I cannot recall a single individual who relied on academic literature and management in a serious or systematic way. There's a lot of different models out there, but many of them actually not really proved to be wrong, not to be good to be right, because we believe they're coming from the wrong angle. As I mentioned today, I want to focus on the ineffective part of leadership, and that's coming really from the grassroots of psychology, as our company as well coming from that angle. If you look at really what Freud or Piaget has been doing, they actually studied errors and mistakes to understand the normal functioning. And you would think that maybe this would suggest that it might be useful to study rather bad leadership to understand good leadership. For various reasons. Number one is that many cases we are really hiring those people, those politically astute, bright, intelligent people to become leaders, but they fail. So we need to really understand why they're going to fail and focus on that. When Dr. HOGAN, our founder, started to focus on this, he was obviously, as I said, coming from Freud and Piaget, but he looked into the literature and said that what about failure? Who is talking about failure? At first, he went to the military, where failure is very relevant. I mean, like it's unfortunate, it's measurable. If somebody is beaten, somebody is losing more soldiers, so on and so forth, that's unfortunately the statistics behind. So when you look at that, there is a very interesting book wrote by Norman Dixon, who wrote on the psychology of military incompetence. And he was focusing on 10 major battles of the British Army and see why those generals screwed up, basically. What was the cause of the failure? And he identified roughly 10, 11 different causes, which were all caused by somewhat of a mental issue, or not completely mental, but more of a personality matter there, which are those I'm not going to say just yet. Because if you look at Hertzberg hygiene factor, for instance, which was one of the most recited article in the Harvard Business Review at all times, we all know about him, about what he says. But he also says that when it looks really into motivated workforce, engaged workforce, what is really alienating individuals to feel comfortable at workplaces is a boss who is not really functioning well. And interestingly, and this is already getting very interesting here, is finding out the same root causes what Norman Dixon found out regarding the British Army. Or when we look at John Benz, who was one of the early age workplace psychologists who was working at Sears, a department store, which does not exist anymore, by the way, but it was not his fault. He was following people all through times, looked at why they becoming successful, why they failing, and he made a lot of interviews with people, exit interviews as well, people who left organizations, and he found out that again, the ineffective leadership was really ruining the organization itself, or such as McCall and Lombardo, who were one of the founders of the Center for Creative Leadership. In this study, they interestingly finding out the same point, and unfortunately, a bad news that there is no news in good news in that sense. And what we have to really look for is rather what makes someone fail in organizations and try to find out those root causes for those areas. And because not only this is not good for long-term operation of the company, but became super expensive, because when you want to get rid of those individuals like Carla Fiorina, who was also part of the Hewlett-Packard and Compaq merger, which is an absolute failure, or Stan O'Neill at Merrill Lynch, or Bob Nardelli at Home Depot, or some of the other folks I mentioned earlier, it's not only that they ruined the organization, but when you fire them, especially at Wall Street, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars for the organization. So that's not necessarily going to be helpful for you to move ahead. When we are, Stefan, would you like to add something on here?
Yeah. Y justo para mí es interesante, ¿no? O sea, yo empecé a trabajar en liderazgo hace 16 años y me acuerdo en estos momentos cuando íbamos a las conferencias de recursos humanos, empezábamos a hablar de desmotivación, los millennials que no se integran, las generaciones, etcétera. Y ya han pasado 16 años, ponemos en mi carrera, y veo que las estadísticas empeoran. O sea, los números que mostró hace rato cada vez son peores, ¿no? Y cada año pasa y cada vez tenemos más metodologías, más programas de coaching, etcétera. Y la tendencia sigue siendo la misma, ¿no? Cada vez estamos peor en cuestión de conexión con el liderazgo, de tener realmente ejemplos de liderazgo efectivo, etcétera. Entonces, este approach del que estamos hablando justamente de, sí, está bien estudiar el liderazgo de lo que nos sirve y lo que aporta al negocio, pero también tenemos que ver ese otro lado del liderazgo, que es el liderazgo negativo, ¿no? El que no es efectivo, el que daña relaciones, el que afecta cómo las personas se conectan con el negocio, qué tan motivadas están, etcétera, porque es ese otro lado de la otra cara de la moneda que luego ignoramos, ¿no? Entonces vemos cuáles son esos skills de éxito y nos olvidamos completamente de cuáles son esos otros que vienen juntos a veces, ¿no? Y hay veces que van de la mano uno con el otro y que nos llevan a estas situaciones que, como estos líderes que hemos visto a lo largo de la presentación, pues sí tenían ciertas habilidades que los llevaron a esas posiciones, tenían ciertas cosas que aportaban al negocio, una visión de negocio que los llevó a esas posiciones. Entonces, son esos otros comportamientos que también traían en su bagaje que terminaron destruyendo el negocio, ¿no? Y terminaron generando pérdidas millonarias, como lo vimos hace rato. Entonces, todo esto es algo que para mí es como muy importante que reflexionemos cuando hablamos de liderazgo, porque tendemos a ver como el lado positivo y motivar a la gente y cómo ayudar a los demás. Pero ojo, el comportamiento tóxico, y es algo que también el doctor Hogan dice, el comportamiento tóxico dentro de las organizaciones tiene mucho más peso en el resultado financiero del negocio que incluso los comportamientos positivos, ¿no? Conectando con lo que decía ella al inicio de la presentación, ¿no? Cuando hablamos de cultura, otras famosas frases es, la cultura de una organización se define por los peores comportamientos que estamos dispuestos a tolerar, ¿no? Entonces, si estamos buscando en nuestros líderes que tengan ciertos comportamientos que aportan y abonan al negocio, pero al mismo tiempo toleramos todos esos otros comportamientos que son dañinos, no nos debería sorprender que esos comportamientos dañinos terminan teniendo mucho más impacto en el día a día que los positivos que a lo mejor reclutamos en la entrevista, ¿no? Y que después se nos olvidaron. Bueno, ya la persona estaba dentro y vemos esos comportamientos que están afectando a los equipos, que están afectando a la productividad y que al final del día se ve en el retorno de inversión del negocio.
So when we are going further in thinking about how can we actually detect all these inefficiencies in individuals, we have to also going back to all those studies which I mentioned, which is not only mentioning that there was a very, very similar way how those leaders actually fail within the army, within organizations, but also there was something commonality with them that they already been in a comfortable position and their behavior became unfiltered. And so that's why we started to focus on how we can actually measure when the unfiltered behavior is going to come out. It's not that the filtered behavior when how we are showing up at the job interview, how we are behaving in regular circumstances is not matter. We're also focusing on that. But we believe it's way more interesting, especially when it comes to a leadership position, to see how individuals might change when they are having an unfiltered behavior, which would mean they are tired, they are bored, or just the honeymoon period is over. I mean, you all know people who we hired them and 6 months later they started to behave very differently. And this is also what it's important. It's very hard to really detect at a job interview. But job interview, everybody wants to shine and wants to do their best. But how they're going to behave 6 months later, that is going to be very important. In our methodology, we're also focusing on the filtered behavior, what we call the bright side of personality. And we're also focusing on the dark side, which is more of the unfiltered behavior. We're also focusing on motives, values, and preferences. That's the 3 areas we are detecting, but we believe that especially for leadership positions, the most development opportunities for almost every leader is really focusing on the dark side and understanding the point of time when that pure Anakin Skywalker, the pure talent is becoming Darth Vader and how to eliminate that. The dark side behavior actually creates short-term wins. That's why it's good. Until we want to manage our career, we want to be a little bit pushing ourselves to the limits. We want to be a little bit more visible in organizations. It's beneficial, we have to say. But then in long term, it's becoming really a problem. Dark side behavior is based on strength, actually. And that's also a bad news because that's why self-awareness is going to come in place, because you will need, for example, a very ambitious leader who needs to be a leader who needs to be in front of organizations, show the way. But when that leader becoming too bold, when he's not taking care of his team anymore, when he's the one who is always in the center of attention and not listening to feedback of others around himself or herself, this is the area when the overuse strength is going to be an issue. Too much dark side will get us fired. We are usually hiring people for the bright side, what competencies they have, and we fire them because of the dark side, and they leave because the motivations are not fulfilled. So that's the three basically bad stories at the end of the day. But too much dark side will get you fired, but also not enough will get you ignored. If you are not able to push yourself a little bit to the limit, but that's the key to how to find that limit, you might get ignored. And unfortunately, everyone has some dark side tendencies, like most of the people, 2, 3, even in this room, even in Panama. And it's more a question of if you're getting actually more talented, the greater the potential of the dark side. I see many successful startup entrepreneurs, and all the dark side areas are absolutely maxed out for them, because that's how they work. And power doesn't corrupt; it reveals, which means that if somebody becomes the position of power, this is becoming even more visible. In most cases, I'm sure you have seen leaders around yourself who are behaving very differently when they are in the position. So this is how we ended up to develop the dark side of personality and the HOGAN development survey, which is focusing on these areas. And those 11 characteristics, which mentioned by Norman Dixon, by Vance, by all the folks I mentioned, is actually pointing to the same 11 areas, which I'm going to talk a little bit about it in more details, because I think you will see some stories and you might remember some of your bosses who actually behaved in this similar way. Before I go on scale by scale, I will say a few words about each and every scale. You could see the English and the Spanish version of the scale, what we are measuring in this case. I can imagine a situation when the leader is there, 6 months later, all the filter is out and the person comes out and you see the real individual. And it actually manifests in 3 different ways. Even though you see 11 scales on the screen, the first 5 is going to focus on, I'm sure it's familiar for you from the fight-flight mode, is that the person is getting disappeared. So it's like moving away. It's like in a flight mode. They disappear and people don't know what happened to that leader. They're not there anymore. They're not picking up the phone, or they're just avoiding answering, or they're always asking for more information. So they are kind of getting out of the way, but in not a good way, because people feel the void and they don't know what to do. So that's what's happening for some people when they're under stress and they're bored, when the real them coming out with the first 5 scale. And again, I'm going to be in details very soon. The next 4 scale is more about the fight mode. And this is what we see in many, many cases when somebody, as an ambitious person, becoming too bold or too imaginative, just throwing ideas all everywhere and not really moving into interpretation, or becoming too colorful and always want to be in the center of attention, or pushing the limits too much. This is like when people will feel that the boss is always fighting, is always against me. What's happening here? No, they don't care about my ideas. What can I do in this situation? And this is very, very eliminating for the workforce. And the last 2 is actually an interesting one. That's what we call moving with characteristics, when you are getting so much obsessed with the work, a perfectionist way, that you're not focusing on anything but work to be done, or you are a people pleaser and you kiss up and you kick down, basically. And that's also noticed by the workforce around yourself. So let me going into details. As I said, the first 5 characteristics is the one when people will feel that individual is kind of disappearing from us, and I'm not getting my resource from my boss, which we believe is the most important, that the leader is a resource for the group. And in these situations, we don't see that. The excitable individual is a very moody one. You don't even know if you walk into the room if it's going to be a nice day or a bad day. You're going to be always terrified by this individual in this case. And I'm revealing something which is going to be shown later on as well, that we have done just recently a quite big study about effective leaders, global leadership effectiveness study, which is available for you as well to take a look, where we also asked about ineffective leaders. We had over 10,000 respondents all around the world, and this scale was number 1, which people hate the most. They want predictability. They don't like that, the boss is this or that the other way, and there is so much uncertainty is running around. Why is moving away? Because it's not necessarily relevant, or it's not like an attacking way. Usually these people scream, but with the closed door behind. So that's a little bit different there. Well, there are the skeptical bosses, where we don't say that, some level, as I mentioned, some level of skepticism you might need to not just to accept everything for granted, but when you are too skeptical, when you're asking too many questions, too many things, and people feel that you don't trust them, again, it's going to be very much of a no-go zone. One of the famous global leader who was too skeptical is Nixon. We all know about the Watergate scandal and how he was tapping the rooms and everything, and that actually made his, one of the US presidents who actually had to resign in this situation. There are the cautious individuals who always want to avoid decision, and they just don't know if it's really risky or not risky, and they're always asking additional questions. Again, create distrust in the organization. Or are the reserved ones, these are the really disappearing ones whose door is always closed, who doesn't like to pick up a phone, maybe they just want to talk in emails. Again, people feel that maybe there is a distrust, there is something behind this behavior, and that's why all the workforce is getting eliminated. If I talk about the US leader, I'm always talking about the Soviet Union leader, like by Mikhail Gorbachev in the 80s. He was very, very famous to be a reserved person. In every time, and there was a huge scandal or issue for Soviet Union, let it be Korean fighter shot down, or even Yeltsin's appearance, he was always at his dacha, reported to be dacha, and was not commenting on anything. So definitely he was one of those reserved individuals. And there is the last one of the moving away cluster. I love the cat because it's perfectly characterizing a passive-aggressive, leisurely behavior. An individual always says yes, but means no, who kind of never really, expressing a real opinion and kind of avoiding having his or her agenda. And again, it's not like a direct conflict, that's why it's moving away, but also pretty much characterize someone who become ineffective in this situation. And again, this is also coming from a bright side sometimes, because many cases we see that if there is a very high interpersonal sensitive individual, they don't want to hurt others. That's why they never say no to them, but it's going to be hurtful because trust is going to go down. Stefan, do you want to give anything to the moving away?
Yeah. Nada más como justamente recapitulando un poco acá, ¿no? O sea, justo ahorita lo que decía al final, muchas cosas las asociamos luego también con cosas positivas. O sea, no necesariamente estos elementos que se convierten en descarriladores, naturalmente es algo que podamos ver desde un inicio. O sea, lo vemos cuando entramos en situaciones de estrés o de crisis. Pero entonces, o sea, alguien volátil también lo podemos asociar, por ejemplo, al tema de creatividad, ¿no? O sea, alguien que a lo mejor puede estar pensando en nuevas ideas, aportar al negocio esas diferentes tendencias, que muchas veces lo podemos ver como algo positivo cuando estamos al inicio, pero ¿qué pasa cuando llegamos a una posición de liderazgo importante y esto se vuelve un descarrilador? Y es como de cada día cambio de opinión. Y esto es lo que luego los equipos es como de, oye, es que esta persona me dijo que la estrategia va por acá, pero al día siguiente como que estaba de mal humor y me dijo, no, vamos para el otro lado. Y entonces acá es cuando los equipos empiezan a frenarse, a tener miedo, a decir, oye, mejor voy a estar validando, pero esos cambios repentinos de negocio hacen que perdamos esa visión de negocio que eventualmente pega en la estrategia como está, ¿no? La parte escéptico pasa de manera similar, ¿no? O sea, mejor un escéptico cuando está en su día tranquilo, o sea, mejor es alguien que cuida los detalles, que realmente nos está ayudando a tener una estrategia de negocio bien pensada, considerando todos los elementos. Pero ¿qué pasa en esos momentos de crisis cuando este escéptico lo llevamos a un punto donde ya empieza a cuestionarte, ¿no? Y todo lo que presentan los equipos es, oye, se nos ocurre esto, híjole, no sé por esto, no sé por aquello. Y nos empezamos a sentir como equipos ya para qué hablo. Entonces, esto muchas veces detona esa reacción en los equipos de ya mejor no propongo, porque de todas maneras me lo va a cuestionar, ¿no? Pasa lo mismo con el cauteloso, que es como, oye, es que necesitamos tomar esta decisión. No, pero es que me faltan datos, es que, etcétera. Que mejor un cauteloso puede ser un buen líder en un contexto donde estamos con mucha variación externa, pero si lo lleva a un extremo de demasiado detalle, demasiado decir, necesito más información, no puedo tomar una decisión, nosotros como equipos a lo mejor sentimos, oye, este negocio no está yéndose a ningún lado, ¿no? Y nos empieza a preocupar el futuro que pueda tener porque no se están tomando las decisiones en los momentos adecuados. Igual pasa con el reservado, que a lo mejor en el sentido positivo puede ser cuando una persona piensa mucho, ¿no? Piensa mucho en las cosas y que esa reflexión lo puede llevar a momentos positivos, pero cuando se convierte en un descarrilador es, oye, tenemos una situación en el negocio, ¿con quién lo hablo? Entonces, esto es apoyo de liderazgo, que me apoye, que me guíe, etcétera, pero no está y no lo encuentro. Entonces, eso también llega a alejar a los equipos porque pues, al final del día no tienes ese soporte que una estructura deberías de tener, ¿no? Y lo mismo pasa con el pasivo agresivo, ¿no? O sea, puede ser alguien que, por ejemplo, en un rol comercial hace mucho sentido, ¿no? Porque tiene esa capacidad de manejar situaciones. Entonces, típico CEO que es muy bueno comercialmente hablando, pero que en el día a día puede generar esas fricciones con sus equipos al no tener una cierta claridad de lo que realmente nos está diciendo. Entonces, también genera esa desconfianza con sus equipos en el día a día al decirme, oye, sí, pero luego nos damos cuenta que al otro le dijo otra cosa, ¿no? Entonces ahí empezamos a tener esos conflictos.
These are again the moving away characteristics. Now let's see the moving against characteristics, and I will cover the +2 as well, and then I will pass the floor back to you. I already mentioned about the bold guys, like the very ambitious ones, sometimes becoming too bold and they're not caring about the people around them anymore. Obviously, some US president might be in this category. I'm not going to name which one. The mischievous one, this is the Dick Fuld of the world, the Lehman Brothers guy who is pushing the limits to the metal to the pedal, basically, and not seeing what is the healthy way to stop. Because in all these cases, actually, the way of, as I mentioned, like, you need to be ambitious to be leader-like. But when you're stepping over a thin red line and you're becoming too bold, that's going to be felt by the team and they're going to be demotivated at some point of time. Here, the mischievous leader is taking too much risk and don't realize when is the point to stop, and it's already healthy and going to be not satisfactory for the team. Or the colorful individual who always want to be in the middle of the attention and again not giving chance for the others to shine as well, not listening for the opinions, such as the imaginative person who is also again always coming up with ideas but never moving into implementation in that sense. And again, good to have ideas, good to have a culture, to have innovation, but without actual implementation, it's not going to take us anywhere. And again, these leaders usually not listening to the others' ideas, and that's harmful on a longer term. So these are the moving against characteristics. And as I said, the last two is one, the diligent, which is moving with, as we say. A diligent person is a very prudent individual who under stress or when the real person comes out is not only want to be prudent, yes, like for example, in banking organizations or insurance or other number-related organizations, it's important to be prudent. But when somebody is becoming too diligent, too much sucked in by the task, it also becomes problematic. Why? Because this individual usually never delegates. And also the team around him or her is going to feel the distrust or like feel understand, like they don't feel necessarily at first that the person really wants to just do a good job, because obviously there is a good intention here as well, which helps the individual to move further in the career. But when this person becomes a leader, it's alienating the team around him or her. Or the same thing with the dutiful individuals who also, as I said, rather going to be loyal for the authority and not really loyal for the people. And then I think I don't need to explain what problem is that create.
Sí. Y volviendo a... Justamente me pasó algo muy interesante. Acabo de dar una conferencia en Guatemala y me decían, oye, Stefan, pero es que esto es lo que me piden los consejos de administración que busquemos en los directores, ¿no? Entonces, justamente ahí sí, pero tenemos que tener cuidado en cómo se usa, ¿no? O sea, hace rato decía, no es lo mismo ambición que arrogancia. Entonces, esta línea tan delgada que a lo mejor en una entrevista o cuando hablamos de seleccionar gente, podemos no llegar a ver ese detalle, ¿no? Que, por ejemplo, el arrogante, pues sí, pues es alguien que puede llegar a presentar, o sea, políticamente bien, pero que si lo lleva a un extremo, en especial en momentos de crisis, puede llevar a organizaciones a ese descarrilamiento por esa arrogancia que tiene del yo lo sé mejor que todos los demás, entonces mi decisión es la correcta, no importa si el resto de la organización piensa de manera diferente, ¿no? Lo mismo lo vemos con el arriesgado. Obviamente muchos dueños, o sea, consejos de administración luego dicen, no, pues estamos ahí que asumir riesgos porque el negocio no puede crecer, no se puede estancar. Pero sí, ¿qué pasa cuando ese arriesgado no tiene ciertos parámetros de control donde la persona realmente sea consciente de los riesgos que está asumiendo, y si los lleva a un extremo, puede asumir riesgos que son tan grandes que, como el caso de Volkswagen que vimos hace rato, ¿no? me gusta decir, este es como el yo-yo, ¿no? El yo esto, yo aquello, la persona que piensa más en sí misma. Y muchas veces son igual características de liderazgo que se buscan en los CEOs, pero que no necesariamente terminan teniendo un impacto positivo hacia los equipos, porque está pensando más en él que en el negocio. El imaginativo igual la parte de nuevo, esa persona que a lo mejor puede pensar en muchas alternativas de negocio y estrategias de negocio, pero que en la relación uno a uno también se está haciendo esos cuentos, ¿no? Entonces también es como el perseguido, el que está sintiendo que hay, su equipo está diciendo algo a sus espaldas cuando no es cierto, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces termina generando ese conflicto. Digo, las últimas dos que creo que son más transparentes, ¿no? Que el perfeccionismo, que también CEOs perfeccionistas pueden llegar a aportar cierta cuidado de la estrategia, pero también lo pueden frenar si parálisis por análisis, ¿no? O sea, si lo llevamos a un exceso. Y también, por ejemplo, acá me pasó hace poco con un cliente que querían, era un fondo de deuda, y querían una persona que fuera súper cuidadosa con los procesos, era como el contrapeso del fondo, pero decía sí, pero el día que tenga que quedar bien contigo, todo lo demás va a dejar de importar, ¿no? Entonces se puede llegar a brincar las reglas con tal de quedar bien con los demás. Entonces, ahí es donde justamente vemos ese impacto del liderazgo.
In all these skills, I think the best way how to interpret them is always put the small word too in the beginning. So it's like if somebody becoming too diligent, too bold, too imaginative, that's going to be harmful. And obviously, I'm not going to leave here as a cliffhanger, because we're not only able to assess if people have issues with these tendencies, with these relevant tendencies, but we also have some suggestions what to do with, how to manage the dark side. Sometimes there are what we call forgiveness credits. If everything goes well, everything is fantastic, the world economy is running well, some people might just get away with it a little bit, but we believe this is not going to be forever. So it's for everyone, it's very important to develop what we call strategic self-awareness. When we really understand that, okay, we're recognizing some problematic behaviors, which has been identified through the assessments. So that's obviously number one. For any changes, we have to realize that, I need to change something in this one, realizing what it is, we can help with that. Also finding the triggers, because all these problematic behaviors are happening for a reason, which could be, again, if somebody's getting bored or tired, or somebody looks like their mother-in-law and that triggered some kind of emotional response in their individuals. So finding the triggers are going to be important. And then once we understood that we have a trigger, which is going to cause some issues for us, really developing strategies how to control that specific problematic behavior, to know that, okay, I'm becoming too bold because I really want to make sure that everything runs well, but my team's feeling that I'm too dominating them, then I'm just stepping back for a second and let them speak. Sometimes these small issues already helping a lot if somebody start to develop their tendencies. We believe in personality is not changing fast, rapidly, in some cases even very, very hard to modify, but we can modify your behavior. And that's what's really happening here. We're not changing our personality, but we know that when those triggers are affecting us, we have to do something, unless otherwise it's going to be harmful for our team and going to, trade down engagement and so on and so forth. So changing personality is really, really hard. But I think what we have to do here is also understanding if somebody wants to change and also know what to change. I mean, that's going to be very important in this situation. And this is what we are helping with. And we believe that without an assessment, it's very hard to actually come up with the issues there, or what is actually going to be, because of norms, of course, and all that other tendencies, how we think of ourselves. In our assessments, we try to focus on what we call reputation, which means that we are rather assessing how other people sees a leader in this situation, not what the leader thinks himself or herself. That's creating also a difference in this regard. So the process itself goes in the following way: assessing to identify the dark side characteristics, focusing on our self-awareness with this, and acknowledging that, yes, I might have some issues, as I mentioned, all of us in this room, unfortunately, have at least 2 or 3 of these tendencies. So it's good to be aware of those. And then the situation awareness as well. What situation creates that issue? What is actually triggering those behaviors which are altered a little bit or very much? And implementing some rituals, strategies, behaviors to really understand and really prevent those dark sides taking over or tendencies. In many cases, I'm not saying that we are talking about evil people, and these are not, obviously, we are not clinical psychologists, we're not going that. It's more like tendencies which will unfortunately derail individuals' careers, which will derail the group and in case the company or even the world. In this case, these are well-intended individuals sometimes, but they just don't understand what's happening in the room and why the team is getting ruined or disengaged at some point of time. We actually have the statistics, which I mentioned earlier, because we just had run this big global leadership effectiveness study. And we looked at what actually people currently feel the most alienating right now at workplaces. And we also looked at how leaders are and what actually people don't want to see within this survey. As I mentioned, 10,000 global respondents. And I think we have also the Latin American slide where I will give you the floor to talk a little bit about. Interestingly, there are not too many differences in this regard, but we see that on a global population, when we focus about, we're mostly focusing on leadership assessments. We're working with the whole work population, but leadership is our sweet spot. We're doing roughly 1 million assessments annually. So we are existing since 1987. So we do have loads of data about leaders all around the world. We see that the leaders are usually lower on excitable, lower and cautious, and lower on the leisurely, and on confident, assertive, and self-observed, which means that they are moderate or high on bold. And that's how the leaders like overall, big time. And actually, when we ask people what leaders they don't want to see in their workplaces, they talked about, as I said, that they don't want to have those emotionally controlled and tolerant. They want to have emotionally controlled and tolerant leaders. This is even communicative, open, and honest. So at this point, this is okay with the general leadership population. Of course, everybody is different, and statistics are dangerous as an average. But there's also some tendencies. But as I said, this is what people don't want to see at all, those excitable leaders. That's something. But it seems to be that the global leadership population is responding to that well. The problematic area, and I think it's not coming as a big surprise, the bold issue, and the leaders are becoming too bold, too arrogant, too dismissive to their team. This is what we see currently as a high average, an issue for the leaders, which they need to take into consideration. So if there's any one sizable takeaway, is really making sure that the leaders are aware of the limitations, and when their ambitious behavior becoming too bold, how harmful it's going to be for the organization. Maybe you want to say a few words about the Latin American tendencies.
Sí, y corrimos este estudio no solo, está en el estudio global, pero está en el estudio para Latinoamérica. Y justamente algo que es interesante es que las tendencias son las mismas. Muchas veces cuando hablamos de liderazgo, no, es que el liderazgo en Europa, no es que el liderazgo en Asia es diferente, etcétera. Pero cuando hablamos de personalidad realmente, las cosas que nos definen y esas cosas que nos descarrilan, vamos a ver que prácticamente se repiten. Sí cambian un poco los porcentajes, en especial acá en la parte de arrogancia, pero justamente algo que llama mucho la atención son estos elementos que las personas no queremos dentro de las organizaciones y que terminan siendo perfiles que tendemos a buscar cuando reclutamos. Entonces, ese choque es muy fuerte porque entonces empezamos a ver que sí, los líderes que hoy en día realmente están dentro de las organizaciones son elementos que no estamos buscando, como esta arrogancia, el engreído, ¿no? El que es yo soy el que sabe todo y que nadie más me va a venir a decir a mí cómo hacer las cosas, ¿no? Entonces, ese tipo de comportamientos son los que también vemos que las personas no quieren dentro de las organizaciones y que, sin embargo, digamos en esta, pues es lo que sí estamos reclutando, ¿no? Entonces, claro, muchas veces decimos, es que esa persona ambiciosa con pocos resultados va un poco de la mano, sí. La pregunta es ¿cuánto? ¿No? ¿Es alguien que lo puede controlar, que se puede autorregular, o es alguien que de plano no? Entonces, aquí justamente pues, la data de Latinoamérica nos está reflejando eso, que termina siendo esos comportamientos los que tristemente seguimos nosotros. Especialmente tiene que ver mucho con el tema cultural en Latinoamérica, ¿no? El paternalismo, ese líder que creció y que sí, ¿no? Pero no es, si bien es algo que estamos acostumbrados a, no necesariamente es lo que la gente en general, y esto no tiene que ver, por eso me gusta esta slide, porque si bien estamos hablando de global versus Latinoamérica, podríamos hacerlo de género, podríamos hacerlo de generaciones, podríamos lo que sea, da igual, ¿no? Las personas no queremos este tipo de comportamientos y termina siendo, creo que, algo que para los que toman decisiones sobre los altos mandos dentro de las organizaciones, termina siendo un reto para justamente justificar por qué este tipo de comportamientos dañan organizaciones, generan un costo financiero para las organizaciones y que no necesariamente es lo que se espera tradicionalmente de ese liderazgo.
So this is what people don't want to see there. So as final thoughts, I think in our profession in HR, I think, yes, we talk about, of course, effectiveness. We're talking about financial impact. We talk about companies getting better and so on and so forth. But in the end of the day, when we are finding those triggers and helping those leaders, we're actually creating the better world. I mean, I have no better words to say. I always remember my mother coming home from her workplace when she had a board meeting, and she was sitting on the side of the bed and crying basically because of all the feedback and the push she got from the board. And this is not one example of what story. I'm sure you have many of those. And I think when we're talking about HR professionals, we have a chance here to course correct. We know that, again, for most of our lives, the immediate boss is creating those bad moments for all of us. How to have the boss to avoid these situations, this is where the dark side gets really on a person-to-person level, very beneficial, and avoiding those situations where those individuals going home not really satisfied from our workplaces. At HOGAN, we are a very scientific organization. We are drinking science, eating science, day in, day out, all the time since 1987. We're focusing a lot on leadership and other areas, trying to find best leaders, but also try to find out how to avoid those toxic leaders all around the globe, speaking languages which are matter in the world, and we are there for your disposal. I believe that I have said enough for today because the time is running out. And of course, if there's any preguntas, would be more than happy to entertain. If I'm not able to understand, then Stefan can help me out for sure. Then thank you very much for.
Thank you so much, Zsolt and Stefan. So now we have more minutes to a few questions to the online people and also the audience here in person. So if you have any question, any comments about the presentation, so you have the voice. The people online also, así que alguna pregunta, comentarios sobre los temas que hemos abordado en este momento.
Debating.
Maybe I can think of a question. In the solution, right? How we solve this issue. Your presentation, what I understood, was mostly based on my self-awareness. Hey, I am presenting these behaviors, but what do you do when, for example, if I have a client that is showing such behaviors, if I'm working with a person that has a problem, he knows he has a problem, he's bold enough just not to care. I don't do nothing about it. His team is suffering. They're wasting money. How do you handle such people?
Unfortunately, not every case is going to be solvable because I think there is one phenomenon or belief in the HR industry, which would mean everybody is coachable, which is not true. Coachability needs to be some part of the issue. So the people needs to be open to feedback, and they need to be curious as well. If these two together, then we have a chance to move further. If you have someone who is really stubborn and bored, that's not able really to move the needle or not interested to get about feedback about their self-awareness, many cases that's on its own a big issue right there at the beginning. So unfortunately, there's no other way than somebody realizing. But in your example, you mentioned that the individual already knows the problem. So then maybe you can start from there, that they know, and they start with the self-awareness point in this case, and maybe pointing out examples of why it's ineffective for the team. But in the end of the day, if somebody is not really ready, because neither open, neither curious about the outcome, then it's going to be a very hard situation. So it's like, it's not for everyone, not for everyone in this case. And of course, if somebody is getting as high in the chain, on the food chain of the organization, is getting harder and harder.
in this end. I would say that as workplace related psychology is also becoming more of an open area, we see less and less resistance for individuals. But unfortunately, there is still some cases where individuals are going to be lower on the coachability end. That's just the way it is. And unfortunately, they're going to learn on a bad way that they're not going to be successful after some time.
I want to add something. I'm so glad you're mentioning this thing that not everybody is coachable.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I have found also. People need to be open and curious.
Yes.
One more thing that you mentioned is about correcting the problematic behavior,
Mm-hmm.
understanding the trigger, and then developing the strategy.
Yes.
And I found sometimes, or most of the time, when the higher the people are, they tend to be arrogant, self-centered sometimes, and too self-centered even to accept that they need to be corrected.
Mm-hmm.
And it does not happen till the person is open and curious. And this is what I have seen as well. And most of the strategies that people are working upon, they are working mostly on the external strategies,
Mm-hmm.
which hardly works till people are open and curious.
Yeah.
And what I found is that we need to correct the internal strategies, which is in relation to the person itself.
Mhm.
So this thing, what you're mentioning, is what I generally found in day-to-day life as well here in Panama.
Yeah. What we are doing is really to find a starting point that we see that this is likely an issue for you. We don't say what's the trigger. That's a coaching process to really understand why is that coming out for you. But I think in this case, the best sentence is to say that what made you here will not make you to the next level. And I think that's what people don't understand, because as how we started, usually those bold, courageous, limit testing individuals getting to the top of the organization, because these are the political characteristics. That's what makes them successful, means they're getting promoted. And not necessarily they're good leaders, again, they're good politicians. That's why they get to the top of the food chain. And this is the point when they need to grow the other end of the spectrum and see that, yes, I have maybe some limitations as a leader. I might need to, stop being myself and think of the team and really think about myself as a leader, and not as a position, but as a resource for the team from that moment on. And I think once they have this change in the mindset, then it becomes more interesting for them. And I think that's why we're talking about this subject. This is a 20 years old subject, but I still love it because it's still relevant, because unfortunately we still didn't change the world that yet, but step by step, one by one, that's why we try to convince organizations not only look at the competencies, but look at this area as well, because the competency side usually gets well. Again, the hiring the Harvard graduate who has a great CV and all that stuff, which is like, okay, looks good, but we don't know what's going to happen a year later or half a year later. And this is what we want to help with and convince organizations to look at this as well.
And that basically is the shadow self, which is kind of very closed and which is very ignorant, and which ends up leading the companies and the projects towards the downside.
Absolutely.
Finally.
Absolutely. In almost all cases, that's the situation. Yeah. Just thank you note. Thank you too for coming, Erika.
For this reflection, so much appreciated. Have a great day.
Thank you. And then maybe just to add that a word on that also we believe it's a debatable item, that how much influence actual leader has on the financial outcome of the team. But we see it also from statistics that usually the number one area which makes a company generally successful in the industry where they are. Of course, there are some industries which are more hyped, like AI these days, obviously. So some of those, but the second variable, which is the most important, in some cases gets up to over 10% importance in the success of the company, is the CEO of the company. Especially the CEO is having such bad tendencies. And many of those folks were showcased, and we could put hundreds of more leaders there who clearly we could identify the point when they pushed the limit, when they didn't listen for feedback, or they moved the strategy and suddenly didn't care about the results of the organization, which caused the company fail. And I think, getting there and understanding that, even on the top end, even if somebody is super successful running a 100,000 person organization, that doesn't mean that they're not going to get to that point when some of the triggers going to ruin their own career in the company. So
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Stefan, to Zsolt. Because today definitely was an amazing presentation, many insights, recommendation, and great information that we can improve the different strength of about different leaders in our organization. So thank you so much to the all people online, the audience in person. Thank you to coming today and welcome once again to the Be Hateful for the old Amazon team. Thank you so much.